This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi advises against foreign interference in Ethiopia conflict. Nigeria confirms first Omicron cases in airport arrivals in past week. And on World AIDS Day, Uganda concerned about impact of COVID on HIV treatment. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight, I'm alongside my colleague Uche, who has our business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. South Africa's Aspen Pharmacare in a deal with Johnson & Johnson to produce its own branded coronavirus vaccine version. And Angola invests in its Luanda Special Economic Zone for economic growth. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with us for this hour. Let's begin in Ethiopia, where China's state counselor and foreign minister Wang Yi said that China does not interfere in Ethiopia's internal affairs and opposes any foreign powers meddling in the ongoing conflict in the country. He made the comment on Wednesday when meeting with Ethiopian Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Demeke Mekonnen in Addis Ababa. Wang Yi was in Ethiopia on an official visit. Ethiopia's Deputy Prime Minister said his country appreciates China's solidarity. Here is Gurun Chala with the latest. Well, CGTN's Gurun Chala joins us live from Addis Ababa. Gurun, welcome to the program. Great to see you again. China's state counselor and foreign minister Wang Yi spoke about the ongoing conflict in Ethiopia. Can you tell us more about his statement in Addis Ababa, Gurun?
Well, Richard, as you've said earlier, Foreign Minister of China, Wang Yi, spent his day here in Ethiopia. That was the most important visit made in this country since the war began, if you like, Richard, because China and Ethiopia have this strong strategic cooperative partnership between the two sides. And then now the statement made after Wang Yi came to Addis Ababa is something that the Ethiopian authorities welcomed and said, this is what we've been looking for. Him saying that China follows the same non-interference policy here in Ethiopia and will continue supporting the country in its endeavors of trying to solve its internal problems using its own resource and wisdom at the same time. On the other hand, the Chinese foreign minister said that China will continue being partners with Ethiopia. In fact, he is looking forward to more cooperation in the areas of economy, people-to-people relationship and others. So experts tell you that this visit by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was successful and has hit the target it was intended for.
Well, music to their ears, you say. Talk to us more about this, Gurun. How significant is this visit overall in terms of bilateral relations?
Well, as I was trying to indicate earlier, Ethiopia and China have one of the most strategic relations, the highest, if you like, of what China has with different countries. This bilateral relationship can be seen in different directions, Richard, in this country of China, Chinese and Ethiopian companies working together, Chinese investors investing from infrastructure to health to agriculture and other sectors. At the same time, Ethiopia looks up to China for its development, if you like, on the industrial sector. At the same time, we have recently reported the industrial development in the country supporting this Eastern Africa country's macroeconomic growth. And China has been an inspiration, has been the actor, including building those industrial parks from the scratch. So the bilateral relationship is now expected to be strengthened. The diplomatic relationship is something that has been talked about before. The space science cooperation, as China helped ETRSS-1, the first Ethiopian satellite now in orbit, and also the second one to go there so that Ethiopia can be part of the map of countries owning their satellites. So China has been a factor for Ethiopia's inspirations and aspirations to become one of the most growing countries in this continent. So the bilateral relationship has been remarkable, and the two nations now vow to continue strengthening it in the future as well.
All right, well, there you have it. Wang Yi reiterates China's non-interference policy. Guru Mchala, thank you for keeping us up to date with the very latest. While staying in Ethiopia, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has urged Tigrayan rebels to surrender, claiming gains against the rebels. Abiy says government forces were nearing victory just 1 week after he vowed to lead military operations at the war front.
The Ethiopian Defense Forces have launched a counteroffensive on the terrorist organization, and the Prime Minister is now leading this from the front. His decision to join the army in the battlefield does not mean a change on the government's principled position of a peaceful solution to this conflict. His decision has inevitably boosted troop morale and emboldened the people of Ethiopia to unite and to resist and to push back the threat of the terrorist organization. In the past few days alone, great strides have been made in forcing the TPLF to relinquish their occupation of key areas.
Right before his visit to Ethiopia, Wang Yi was in Senegal for the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, which wrapped up on Tuesday. During the event, Wang Yi and the Chinese Commerce Minister attended the 8th Ministerial Conference, co-hosted by their Senegalese counterparts. Wang Yi said Chinese President Xi Jinping's pledge to donate 1 billion more doses of COVID vaccines to the continent will help narrow the vaccine gap. He also said China and African nations will uphold multilateralism. Now, for more on what the China-Africa Cooperation means, we earlier spoke to Obigwe Egwegu, a policy analyst at Development Reimagined. Let's listen in.
The Western media focus on the debt trap narrative is, I think, to a large extent to muddy the water, to make it seem deep. There's no factual basis to it at all. I think what they just want to do is make it very complicated for African countries, African populations to really see the positive side and the dimension of this relationship. And I don't think it's something that really should be taken seriously, because it just doesn't have any basis whatsoever. We saw President Xi's address, and it was filled with so much good packages for the African continent, which shows that there's a strong commitment that is unshaken by the COVID-19 pandemic. So, for example, on trade, there was a commitment towards establishing green lanes for agricultural products, and also to expand the scope of products that are already enjoying zero tariff from least developed countries. All of this will ensure there's continuous growth on the African continent, because if you are, and also there's a 10 billion commitment to increase FDI by 10 billion over the next 3 years, and these investments will continue to drive Africa's recovery, create the jobs that's needed, facilitate trade. Then there's also on the ICT and digital economy, which again many pundits or experts all over the world is talking about how Africa can tap it into its digital economy and use that to spur growth. And then if you look at how, with the expansion of the e-commerce under the Silk Road e-commerce cooperation, there's target of getting up to 100 African stores and 1,000 African products on Chinese e-commerce. So we look at all of this cooperation, whether it's in health, it's in trade, it's in development and digital technology. It's a sound example and show of commitment of the strategic and systemic partnership between Africa that I think is a good model for South-South cooperation.
The Forum on China-Africa Cooperation came to an end with China once again coming in strong to support Africa. And as CGTN's Nick Modima now reports, the conclusion of the forum saw the continent bolster its relation with China.
Africa's continued partnership with China was cemented at the just concluded Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, with key areas like health, education, trade, and technology given emphasis. Chinese President Xi Jinping's keynote speech via video link promised Africa support in various sectors.
我相信，在中非双方共同努力下，
I am confident that with the concerted efforts of China and Africa, This FOCAC meeting will be a complete success. It will pull the great strength of the 2.7 billion Chinese and African people and promote the building of a high-quality China-Africa community with a shared future.
中非命运共同体。
State Councillor and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was also on hand to assure Africa that the ongoing cooperation is there to last and for the benefit of both China and Africa.
The Forum on Africa-China Cooperation has entered its 21st year. The forum has been developing for the better. No matter where we travel in Africa, you can always hear people praising the forum. In the past 20 years, the achievements from the forum have benefited every African country and even every family. So no matter how hard some Western powers smear and slam on China-Africa cooperation, African people always have their own judgment. They know who is their friend and who has been doing the real and good things for them.
Many of the ministerial delegates who attended the forum were happy with the outcome of the meeting, with many of them in closed-door bilateral meetings happy to have strengthened the already existing long-term relationship. On top of the 1 billion vaccines for Africa, China will help the continent streamline sectors like innovation, agriculture, trade, upholding equity and justice, poverty reduction, capacity building, cultural exchange, and peace and security program, among others. The forum came to an end with so much in store for Africa. And according to Foreign Minister Wang Yi, the implementation of the pledges made by President Xi Jinping will start immediately. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Dakar, Senegal.
Nigeria has confirmed 3 cases of the Omicron variant of COVID-19 in the country. The Nigeria Center for Disease Control, the NCDC, says these first cases of the variant was discovered in 3 travelers who arrived in the country from South Africa. CGTN's Deji Badamosi has more on the story.
The announcement did not come as a surprise at all, as many health experts in the country had since been warning that it was only a matter of time before the Omicron variant is discovered here. Travel between South Africa and Nigeria is still allowed. Now, the Director General of the NCDC, Ifedayo Adetifa, says the new variant was discovered following routine travel tests required of all international travelers and genomic sequencing at its laboratory. Travelers were said to have arrived the country last week. The NCDC boss says contact tracing has now begun to identify all those who may have come in contact with the travelers. Lawmakers in the country have asked the government to impose flight restrictions to curb the spread of the new variant in the country. Nigeria plans to vaccinate 70% of its population by next year to achieve herd immunity, but it is still way off that target. Just over 6 million people have so far got the COVID-19 jab in the country. The government is now imposing vaccine mandates to get more people to take the vaccine. Deji Bademasi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
All right, let's bring in Phil Ihaza, who is in Abuja. Phil, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Great to see you once again as well. So, what more can you tell us about President Ramaphosa's visit?
Well, thank you, Richard. So at the moment, President Ramaphosa is on his way to Cote d'Ivoire. He's concluded his visit in Nigeria since arriving yesterday. That's a 2-day visit. But of course, we know that before he came, there was a delegation of some members of his cabinet, close members of his cabinet, that came to, talk about various issues, especially with regards to economic ties, improving economic ties between Africa's 2 largest economies, South Africa and Nigeria. And so today he officially met with the president, also briefed the media on some of the achievements that both countries have made so far with this visit. Now, this visit also coincides with the 10th session of the Binational Commission that was set up 20 years ago between Nigeria and South Africa. So some agreements have been signed, some agreements are still being looked at, memorandum of understanding, but basically they are targeted at improving, the cultural ties, because According to the governments, both presidents are saying that economic ties or business engagements cannot improve until, of course, cultural ties are also looked into. So things like youth involvement, civic education, even involvement in art and culture, the movie industry, and all of that. Those things will be explored. Trade and investments, making sure that Nigerian business men and entrepreneurs can do business in South Africa, and vice versa. Already we know that over 120 companies of South African origin are domiciled in Nigeria, and many of them are doing well. So both presidents were able to look at ways that they can also leverage on the Africa Free Trade Agreement to see how that they can improve the economies of both nations, especially after the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. One major thing or key thing to look at as well is the fact that South African president actually commended the Nigerian government and his counterpart, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari, on the fact that he gave, in his words, it was the strongest, solidarity, a message of support to the South African people at this trying time when there is a travel ban as a result of the new detection of the COVID variant Omicron, and the fact that the Nigerian government went ahead to still, throw his arms open to welcome the South African visitors. So it's a very good one for both countries so far. It's looking good for business, looking good for bilateral ties and all of that. But of course, the president has jetted out to Cote d'Ivoire, where he'll complete his week-long 4-nation West African tour.
All right, Philly Haza, Ramaphosa and Buhari calling for stronger ties between the nations, and Ramaphosa and Buhari calling for the lifting of travel ban against Southern African countries. Philly Haza, thank you so much for that update. You are watching Africa Live. Time now for a short break. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Here's what's ahead. Uganda concerned about impact of COVID-19 on HIV treatment.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
It's a little tense here. Bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front
clear
line.
View of this front line position.
Once the lockdown happened, all the gyms were instructed to shut down.
Nobody could have foreseen what COVID-19 brought with it. Businesses were not prepared.
Technology had to really play a big part. We had to think of being able to social distance with your client, but still be able to train them. Let's go. Let's go.
We're going to go to what people call the new normal, and it will never be the same as what it was before.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. We appreciate your company. Search and rescue efforts are continuing in Nigeria's Kano State after a boat there capsized, leaving 29 people dead. Authorities have confirmed that most of the victims were Islamic school students who were on their way to a religious ceremony. The vessel was ferrying more than 50 people from the village of Badao to Bagwai, a town on the other side of the river. 7 passengers were rescued after the tragedy. The cause of the accident remains unclear. However, similar incidents have been blamed on overloading and poor maintenance of boats. Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo have launched joint operations against Islamic State-affiliated group in the eastern DRC. The insurgent group, known as the Allied Democratic Forces, has been accused for carrying out a series of attacks in the country. ISIL also said that the ADF was behind the terrorist attack in the Ugandan capital, Kampala, last month. At least 7 people were killed, including 3 suicide bombers. Dozens more were injured. Ugandan Army spokeswoman Flavia Baikwaso has confirmed the air and artillery raids against the rebels. Well, today marks the World AIDS Day in Uganda. Activists remain concerned over the impact that COVID-19 pandemic has on treatment among HIV patients. Uganda has 1.4 million people living with HIV, and 1.3 million of them are on antiretroviral treatment. CGTN's Hilary Ayasega reports.
Immaculate Nshemerirwe is living with HIV, but she says getting HIV-related services during the COVID-19 pandemic has been a challenge.
I've been struggling with the side effects of the drugs. I couldn't get a counselor to explain my experience. Before the pandemic, it was easy to discuss our problems with counselors, but now when you go to the hospital, they just write prescriptions on the bottle and they do not even touch the medical card.
And she's not alone. Teresa Tindicheitira has to walk to the health center. The transport fares have doubled due to the effects of the pandemic restrictions on movement.
By the time I come back home, I am weak. I can't do anything because of joint pain.
Others say taking a balanced diet is a problem because of limited resources.
Some of us lost our jobs, so we can't afford the right diet. But doctors tell us you have to eat well before taking drugs.
Campaigners say equitable access to medicines, vaccines and health technologies remain a big challenge for many patients. Good nutrition and drug management are cornerstones of HIV care. Doctors here worry that the gaps in treatment because of the effects of COVID-19 pandemic can cause drug resistance in HIV patients, which may reverse initial improvements. HIV/AIDS activists have intensified outreach programs to help their members access the services.
We are talking about equitable access to services, and it is done through mobilization, especially grassroots people mobilizing their fellows to go and access treatment wherever possible.
The government says it wants to vaccinate about 22 million people by January next year so that it can fully reopen the economy and also relax restrictions. But for patients like in Nshemerirwe, accessing better services may take some time as the government tries to fix the gaps in the health system. Hilary Ayasega, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
All right, let's bring in Yvette Raphael, an executive director at Advocacy for Prevention of HIV and AIDS in South Africa. Yvette, welcome to Africa Live. Thank you for joining us. Let's talk more about the impact of COVID on accessibility of drugs, testing kits, etc. Yvette.
Thank you so much for having me. And I would like to reiterate that in the beginning of this pandemic, did we warn governments, the South African government as well as the African governments as advocates, that there is going to be a problem when the movement of people are restricted and people are not able to go to clinics. So we have warned them, and that is exactly what we are seeing now on the ground in our communities. The delivery of drugs, in HIV drugs, HIV prevention drugs, is becoming more and more difficult, and people are not able to access their treatment because of the restrictions that the coronavirus has caused in our country.
All right, compelling points indeed. Yvette, the theme for this year is End Inequalities, End AIDS. This will certainly require bold action against inequalities. What do you propose should be done, Yvette?
I think what is needed right now is for rich countries, for the first world countries, to take stock and remember humanity. There cannot be an end to the coronavirus if we do not include the African countries, poorer nations, in the vaccine rollouts. What we are seeing right now is that because our countries were left out, because African countries did not have access and Western countries did hoard the coronavirus vaccine, are we seeing the spur up of so many variants, and it's going to become even worse if the West and rich countries do not make a decision to make the vaccines available and stop hoarding the vaccines.
All right, Yvette, thank you for your context and perspective. We appreciate it. The news continues on Africa Live. Time now for Uche and the business segment.
Thanks, Richard. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. South Africa's Aspen Pharmacare in a deal with Johnson & Johnson to produce its own branded coronavirus vaccine version. And Angola invests in its Luanda Special Economic Zone for economic growth.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor, to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market. It's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
Well, let's start off in South Africa. The country's biggest pharmaceutical manufacturer, Aspen Pharmacare, has agreed to terms for a deal with COVID-19 vaccine manufacturer Johnson & Johnson to produce its own branded version to sell in Africa. Now, the agreement gives Aspen greater control over which customers to supply and also paves the way for a further licensing deal for manufacturing the active pharmaceutical ingredients which are used in the jab. Now, this deal will also help strengthen Africa's security of supply. Until now, it has been J&J that determines which countries can purchase the product. African nations, of course, import about 99% of the vaccines they administer, a situation that has left many of them at the back of the queue when the coronavirus crisis struck in 2020. Now, there will be many tears this festive season as holiday plans have been dashed over a new variant first identified in South Africa. Scientists are yet to determine the severity of the highly mutated Omicron, which has already prompted travel restrictions for several Southern African nations. There's also been chaos at airports around the world as travelers try to make their way to or from South Africa. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with more.
Stephen Pinnock and many other UK nationals were forced to abandon their travel plans when the UK slapped travel restrictions on South Africa after the new Omicron variant.
So my friends were affected more than me because they had 24 hours to get home. I had 48 hours to get home, with the result being that if we did decide to stay, we would have to pay for a quarantine hotel on arrival. So that would be 10 days in a hotel. It was £2,200 sterling. So obviously we've just budgeted for this holiday and for the wedding for half of that.
Pinnock and his friends were special guests at a wedding but were forced to leave before the function.
So we actually had a makeshift wedding on the beach with about maybe a quarter of the guests, a third of the guests. So just we could be part of the wedding, even though they had the actual ceremony the next day when we'd all left. So the 6 of us from Scotland and England. So we did manage to salvage something, but it was just a day of emotional tears. Didn't get any sleep that night trying to find new flights.
Chaos ensued at South African airports over the last few days as a growing list of countries followed the UK's lead.
It's completely affecting me. I'm working online, so of course you planificate all your trip. I have to buy extra tickets. I have a flight from here and now I have to buy a ticket to Tanzania, because apparently Tanzania is done rejecting like the other countries, and then book another flight to Dubai, and then Dubai to Portugal, all by expenses.
From those that have been stranded, we managed to get quite a few of them back on their flights back home. And of course, we are just waiting on more information around the repatriation. We are also engaging with the consular corps and the embassies to make sure that we get a better snapshot of who of their citizens are still in the country.
Travel agents have had their hands full with disappointed South Africans having their holidays ruined.
We had a lot of customers who had booked for November and December, obviously to reunite with family and go on holiday. They hadn't seen family for a very long time. So a lot of disappointment all around. As you may know, the UK now has us on that red list, and flights will resume this week, into the UK, but it's only for citizens and for residents of the UK who will now need to enter a quarantine facility for 10 days.
The UK is one of South Africa's key markets for inbound and outbound travellers. High-level talks are underway to have restrictions relaxed.
We are hoping and really, really praying that all the advocating that's going on from a regulatory point of view, that we have a voice in terms of this being a knee-jerk reaction.
South Africa has not tightened restrictions, but hopes for a recovery in the tourism sector have been severely dashed. Holiday cancellations in just a few days have cost the industry at least $60 million as scientists scramble to determine the risk of the new variant Omicron. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Meanwhile, the United States is moving to require all air travelers entering the country to show a negative COVID-19 test performed within 1 day of departure. This is in response to concerns about the new Omicron coronavirus variant. Currently, vaccinated international air travelers can present a negative test result obtained within 3 days from their point of departure. Now, on Tuesday, the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention advised Americans against travel to Niger, Papua New Guinea, Poland and Trinidad and Tobago, citing COVID-19 concerns. Stricter rules are expected to be announced on Thursday. The president has remained non-committal on plans to revise restrictions on Southern Africa.
Well, it kind of depends. It's going week to week here to determine what we need and what the state of affairs. We're going to learn a lot more in the next couple weeks about the lethality of this virus, about how much it spreads, about whether what we have can control it, etc. So it'll depend on those issues.
Well, let's shift focus now. In Angola, the Luanda Special Economic Zone is seen as a key driver for the country's economy going into 2023, when the country is projected to return a 2.9% growth. Now, Angola's real GDP growth is currently at 0.1%, following a contraction of 5.1% in 2020. Here's Angelo Coppola. He is there and now reports.
The economic zone is all about government implementing strategies to promote non-oil sector related GDP growth, mainly by diversifying and prioritizing investments in other areas like agriculture, mining and energy.
We have analyzed since 2019 about 94 projects, and 20 of them are implemented, and it was possible to attract to zone about $140 million.
Part of the strategy of enticing potential investors to consider the zone was the creation of a showroom.
Of course, that fills into our portfolio of trying to captivate in foreign investment, right? And we give them a platform for our local contact to be exposed and showcased for a broader audience. And of course, it's beneficial for us because people who want to know more about the Special Economic Zone can go visit our showroom and be able to have contact directly with the product and the quality. That's all made in Angola because it comes from the economic zone.
Besides the automobile sector, there are several industrial sectors that are being targeted.
Food sectors, manufacturing sectors, and also health sectors, because we need to have more companies to make equipment of the sector of wealth, because we need it, because we don't have.
If we can get some good investors to come in and perhaps try to develop more artificial intelligence technology, more software development and hardware development technologies to boost the technological sector of Angola, and of course supplying more jobs, and you being able to educate the youngsters and try to give them another way of looking at life and aiming for another key strategic growth in terms of development, for me that would be beneficial.
The Special Economic Zone here in Luanda has been a part of the industrial life for several years now, and this next phase is going to see a growth in interest and industrialization. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Luanda, Angola.
And heading to Egypt now, the country's economy grew at its quickest pace in 2 decades in the first quarter of the 2021-2022 fiscal year. Now that is as it continued to rebound from last year's slump in activity caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Authorities announced that GDP expanded at an annual 9.8% during the first quarter, boosted by the recovery in the hospitality and the manufacturing sectors. Well, CGTN's Yasser Hakim has the latest on those numbers.
Egypt's 20-year record economic growth has hit a record 9.8% in the July to September period, up from 0.7% in the same period last year. This is the second consecutive quarter of strong economic growth after GDP clocked in at 7.2%. Experts owe these results to government measures taken before and during the outbreak of the pandemic.
Before the COVID-19, there was a successful economic reform program in coordination with the World Bank and IMF, and this has helped sustain the Egyptian pound against the dollar and boost the foreign currency reserves. To counter the effects of the health measures during the coronavirus pandemic, there were emergency funds and initiatives from the central bank to support the manufacturing sectors, agriculture sector, the construction sector, and the travel and tourism industries.
The impact was quickly seen in the economy. All of the country's crucial sectors saw considerable growth rates. The most predominant, though, is the hospitality sector, with the fastest pace at a massive 181%, recovering from the global lockdown and travel restrictions in 2020. There were other factors as well.
There was an increase in global natural gas prices, and the government increased gas prices to raise revenues. The telecom and IT sector was a main contributor, with 16.3% growth, pushed by the aggressive digital transformation strategy by the government, in addition to the Suez Canal revenue, which has increased by 10%.
In spite of the global price hikes and supply chain shortages, the North African government has confidently forecast a 5.7% annual economic growth, up from 3.2% year-on-year, and that's above the IMF projections of 5.2%. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And that's all for now in Africa Live Biz. But coming up later on Global Business Africa, unemployment in South Africa is at a new high as the crisis worsens. Of course, more on that coming up atop of the hour. For now, back to Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. A lot more coming your way on Africa Live. Here's a peek at the headlines. A look at Kenya's drought crisis that has left millions food insecure.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Nta, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. By November, over 2 million people in almost half of Kenya's 47 counties were reported to have been affected by food insecurity. Though the short rains have begun in parts of the country, many parts are still grappling with the effects of the prolonged drought period. Wilkerson Yapwa has more insights on the drought crisis.
At the beginning of September 2021, President Uhuru Kenyatta declared drought a national disaster in Kenya. The 2020 short rains, which were experienced between October to December, and the 2021 long rains had been poor, especially across the country's arid and semi-arid regions. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs estimated that over 2 million people would be in need of food aid by November. Kenya's National Drought Management Authority noted that the drought had led to deteriorating conditions of vegetation, increased distances to water sources, worsening livestock conditions, reduced milk production, and increased number of children at risk of malnutrition. Kenya is prone to drought because only about 20% of the country receives adequate regular rainfall. The country's drought management system uses 5 drought early warning phases categorized as normal, alert, alarm, emergency, and recovery. Out of 47 counties, by November, 8 counties were in the alarm drought phase. Climate change is the main driver of the erratic and recurring droughts and has been partly attributed to the recent locust outbreaks in East Africa. The short rains have begun in parts of the country, and the amount of rain received will determine whether the conditions in the affected counties will improve, enabling farmers to reap from their farms and pastoralists to sell their herds again. We traveled to the country's northern region, and here are some more insights. The bubble of beans boiling on the stove is a welcome sound in this homestead. It means today's meal is guaranteed. For months, Marsabit, a county in Kenya's expansive northern region, has been ravaged by drought, and this situation has led to food insecurity. The meal 25-year-old Arbi Ali is preparing will feed her 3 children tonight. Nobody knows if there will be something to eat tomorrow.
Since the drought started, we've faced so many problems. The animals have no food and we have no money. We often ask our neighbors for food or take food items on credit from the shop.
Arbi's husband is away, hiding the last of the family's goods. It is a situation that has built up over months. Across the country, 2.5 million people are facing hunger. People in Kenya's northern region say the area hasn't received substantial rainfall over the last 3 years. Climate change has increased the frequency and severity of droughts in the region. When he was younger, Ali Omar and his family fetched water from this water pan, but it has since dried up. This water pan was dug up in the year 1987, and in the decade since, locals say that they have only ever seen it dry up completely twice, this being the second time. And now the land is parched, the animals are thirsty, and their livelihoods are threatened, and locals say there seems to be no reprieve in sight.
The population here has since grown, and even if it were to rain, the water would be finished so fast because so many people need it.
The National Drought Management Authority predicted that people in the arid north and coastal parts of the country would need food aid due to poor rains between March and May this year. The crisis has been worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. President Uhuru Kenyatta has declared the drought a national disaster and promised comprehensive mitigation measures. Now, about once a month, government representatives deliver food rations. These are part of wider efforts to help the most affected people.
Disabled are given some funds after 2 months. The old age is the same. Then there's a hunger safety net program where government is assisting the community.
But at best, these efforts are just like a drop in a sea of increasing need. Every day, women line up at the local borehole for water. They don't believe the water is safe for human consumption, but it keeps the thirst at bay, keeps them alive for another day. And even though in some parts of the country it has already begun to rain, in Marsabit, the clear blue skies tell a different story, and another day ends as it began, hot, dusty and hungry. Wilkes Anyabwa, CGTN, Marsabit, Kenya.
To Zimbabwe, and the Chinese government, through its embassy, has sunk 1,000 boreholes in 6 provinces to help ease the water shortage. CGTN's Joy Kurukijuma with the details.
Life-giving water, a rare commodity in many rural areas of southern Africa's Zimbabwe. Many have relied on municipal water supply that has in recent times become unreliable. But the Chinese sunk boreholes are now giving a new lease of life.
Now that we're having the borehole, we're planning to have a nutrition garden, which has already been cleared. Behind me here, there is land, and in front of me there is land. And we're saying, let's work hard, because the water is now without cost, as we have been honored by the Chinese friends.
Not too far from here in the village of Lumene, in the South Province of Matabeleland, a similar scenario persisted. Water scarcity due to a drop in groundwater levels. A borehole is now providing a steady stream of water to over 300 villages.
Our lives have improved. So far, we haven't had any diarrhea because we are now getting clean water. No one has been to the hospital. We always have water. Before, we used to have 1 bucket per household. As for now, we are no longer queuing. We are getting our water freely at any time.
The availability of water has helped us because we are now able to focus on other things, household needs that we attend to, and we have also managed to start our small gardens. So this availability of water near our villages has benefited us a lot because we are no longer wasting time going long distances or looking for water, but we're now comfortable doing other things.
A borehole has also changed the fortunes of this hospital in Matabeleland, South Province.
We were facing a big challenge. Our previous borehole had collapsed. So since the installation of the borehole, we now have running water in all facilities at the hospital. Every ward has running water, in theatre, in maternity ward, in offices, and toilets. So it's really assisting us.
But as long as the boreholes have been dug, that means our people, the rural people, even those actually, our clinics, our schools, in schools we have lots of children, some students actually, who are attending some schools. But now, as long as there is water, that means their life is very safe. So that is commendable. You are doing quite a sterling job.
China has assisted many African countries in sinking boreholes and providing a lifeline to water-deprived communities. Joy Kurukijuma, CGTN.
Well, the news continues on Africa Live. Time now for our sports segment. Here's what's ahead. In sports, Moroccan Olympian Halima Hachlaf banned for 6 years for anti-doping violation.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa.